back with another video, and you'll notice that this one is really different from normal. I don't even know what to do with my hands because I'm so used to just having the camera on my hands, and you know, I have my normal like entry and exit and all of that kind of stuff, and now I'm just like, what do I do with them? Anyway, so I thought I would come and do a little like face intro video. I know I did do a channel trailer a while ago, and it was like super short. You guys don't even want to know how many takes I had to do to get something that I was comfortable with, because I just really don't do face videos, which is kind of weird given my background, but you know what, it is what it is. So without further ado, today I thought I would give you guys a little like mini tag. So I've seen these things around where it's like, you know, the teacher tag and blogger tag, like I don't know what all they have, but basically I kind of came up with 5 questions that I've gotten periodically, and just based on comments I get on videos and things from Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And I only picked 5. I wanted to keep it fairly short because you guys know I always tend to have really long videos. I can't stop talking. It's a thing. So I will just go ahead and get started. I'm sorry if this is like super awkward. It is for me too. I'm not used to seeing myself on camera like this, so we'll just kind of go with it. And you know, if you guys don't care for videos like this, then I don't ever have to do them again. I am perfectly fine just having my bullet journal in my hands in the video, but I thought I would give it a try. So first question is, where are you from? I get this one periodically. I think a lot of people who've been around for a while know just based on like stuff I've said and what have you, but I'm actually from the United States. My family is all over the East Coast for the most part, so I don't have a hometown. It's always a really awkward question, and it's one I get a ton because I live overseas and everyone always wants to know where I'm from. And most of the time they're not happy with the United States. They want to know more precisely. So to give you guys an idea, I was born in Michigan, but when I was very young, we moved down to Alabama. So I lived there for about 10 years. And then we moved back up to Northern Virginia, where my mom is from. So East Coast, like that's basically where I'm from. And my parents still live in Northern Virginia. So that's kind of like when I go back and visit, that's usually where I go. So I just tend to say that I'm from near Washington, D.C. is how that actually works out. So I am from the United States, and that is why all of my stuff is in English. I think at least half of you guys who watch my videos are from the US, and the others come from countries that either speak English or have like fairly strong English programs. So that was just kind of an easy decision for me to go ahead and just do videos in English. So the second question I had, which it was gonna be just like a broad whatever, was kind of what's my story. So, because I recently had a question on one of my YouTube videos, and I kind of gave a quick answer, but I thought that maybe this would be a good time to go ahead and like introduce myself a little bit more formally, because crazily enough, there's like 9,000 of you guys who actually tune in and watch my videos, which is crazy, but thank you very much. So I thought I would give you guys kind of a breakdown of who I am and how I ended up where I am now. I've kind of told some people as they ask in comments and that kind of stuff, but I'm gonna try and do a more comprehensive look at this, because a lot of times when I'm typing, I just don't have time to do all of that. So basically, as I said before, my family is from Northern Virginia. That is where I actually went to middle school and high school, and I ended up going to university in Boston. So the reason for that actually started in middle school. The school system that I went to, because we have what's called like the pyramid or whatever, so you have like the elementary schools that funnel into a middle school that funnel into a high school. So my pyramid actually has had a deaf program for years and years. And so when I was in middle school, I actually was in classes where there were ASL interpreters and cued speech transliterators. And so I actually got into that. I've always really liked languages. I read a ton, like I've always been a reader. So I love English, but I also really enjoy learning other languages. And so because of that exposure, because I was lucky enough to have the exposure to that when I was in school, I started learning both American Sign Language and cued speech when I was in middle school. And, you know, I became friends with some of the deaf students in the school. I, you know, chatted with the interpreters and the translators at times. And it basically got to the point where when I went to high school, I initially took Spanish. The way it works for us was you had to do 2 years of 2 languages or 3 years of one. So I ended up doing 4 years of Spanish, and then at the end, once I was able to drop PE, hallelujah, I went ahead and I took ASL because we offered it as a foreign language at my school. So, you know, senior year was approaching, I had to apply for universities, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I always kind of joked that I would love to be paid to learn languages, and so I was doing some research, and you know, I had already talked to the ASL teacher at my school. I knew you know, friends who were deaf, and I knew the interpreters. I knew that that was a job. And so I did some research, and I found a couple of programs that had bachelor's in sign language. So at the time, I graduated high school in 2005. So at that time, there were not very many 4-year programs for interpreting. So I had to kind of sort through. I didn't want to have a 2-year program because I didn't think that would prepare me enough. So at the time, a lot of programs were associate's degrees. And I was able to find a program in Boston. It was at Northeastern University, and they had a 4-year bachelor's program for interpreting, which was awesome. So I decided to apply, and I went there. Fast forward, so I did, you know, my 4 years of university. My school is actually really known for the co-op program, where basically you take off 6 months. So you basically don't have classes for 6 months, and you apply and you work at a company, and then you would come back. As an ASL major, there weren't very many options for us to do co-op. Basically, we could go and work at a local deaf school, or we could do a semester abroad at Gallaudet University. And when I was there, a lot of my friends went to Gallaudet for the semester, and I decided that I didn't want to because, one, it was in my parents' backyard, and two, I knew myself, and I knew that if I went with a bunch of friends, I wouldn't make the most of my time. And so I ended up, while they were all gone and doing that, I got a bunch of my core classes out of the way, and I decided to get a minor in Arabic and a minor in linguistics because obviously languages, I couldn't resist. And people always laugh at me whenever I tell the story of how I decided that I wanted to take Arabic because it makes no sense to anyone except for me. However, I'll tell you guys. So I was looking at the course catalog, trying to see what languages they offered. And one thing that you need to know is especially in high school, I went through this phase where I was absolutely obsessed with Bollywood. And so I really wanted to learn Hindi. However, my school didn't offer Hindi. But I thought, okay, well, you know, Hindi, you have a different alphabet, because one of the major draws for me, aside from the fact that I love Bollywood, was the fact that I really wanted to learn a language where I had to learn a different alphabet because, you know, doing Spanish, it's the same alphabet, you just add a couple of accents, and, you know, I wanted to learn something that was actually going to be much more challenging. So I believe we offered Japanese, there might have been Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and I think that was probably the languages that we offered that were like Roman alphabets. So I was looking through the catalog and I thought, well, in India, they also speak Urdu, and Urdu is like they use the Arabic alphabet. So why don't I take Arabic so I can learn the Arabic alphabet, and then somehow in my brain that was going to be close, even though Hindi and Arabic are like not the same language, even a little bit, like I do realize that. However, just like my logic for, you know, I have these 4 or 5 languages that have non-Roman alphabets, how am I going to choose? That was my way of choosing. So I ended up doing a minor in Arabic, and I did a study abroad in Cairo. So I stayed there for 6 weeks, came back, and yeah, so that was basically university. I graduated, and I stayed in Boston for a year after graduation, and I kind of worked odd jobs around. I worked at Blockbuster right before they went bankrupt, which that was kind of funny. I got out like right around that time. I worked at Boston Public Library in the cataloging department, which was really awesome. And I also worked at the main office for my program at the university, so I still had some exposure to sign language. But I actually, after the 4 years, it was pretty intense, and even though I still loved sign language, I just needed a little bit of a break. So I didn't actually dive immediately into interpreting when I graduated. And so after that year, I was kind of trying to figure out like what my next move was. I was feeling ready for a bit of a change. I love Boston, and if I ever move back to the States, that's one of the top places that I would consider living. But I was ready for a change, and I had always had this dream that I would live in Europe. So I was really lucky when I was a kid. My parents, so I have one younger brother, and we would every once in a while, not very often, but every once in a while we would take family trips. So when I was about 5, we went to the UK. When I was 12, we went to Germany. My mom and I went to France when I was 16. So like I had these periodic trips over to Europe, and I really, really liked it. So I remember when we had our family trip to Germany, we were just in these like really cute little small towns, and just, I love the way of life over there. I love that you could, you know, walk to the store. You didn't necessarily need to have a car if you were in the town. Obviously, to get to different towns, it was easier to have a car. But I remember thinking when I was like 12 years old that someday I want to live in Europe. And I didn't have any like concrete idea of like where or why or how, but just I had this idea that at some point I wanted to live in Europe. So after I graduated and I, you know, was kind of needing a break from interpreting and was working these odd jobs and that kind of stuff, I started to really look into how can I get over to Europe, because obviously in the US we need to have a visa in order to live long-term in Europe. We have like the 3-month traveler's visa, but anything longer than that, you need to be sponsored, you need to have a reason to be there. So school, job, basically. So I started by just looking and trying to see like where can I get a visa, and it became pretty obvious early on that the easiest way for me to get a visa was going to be if I was an English teacher. So whether that meant being an actual English teacher or being an English language assistant or what have you, like doing something like that, because I didn't really want to go back to school at that point. So I needed a job. I needed something that was going to pay me so I could actually make money while I was living over there. And so I was doing some research, and I really wanted to go to Western Europe because, for one thing, you know, I had studied Spanish. That was where I had visited, so it was a little bit more familiar for me for, you know, the first experience going overseas by myself. And so I eventually found a program in Spain. And they have what's called the Auxiliar de conversación, which is basically an English assistant program, and it's through the like Ministry of Education over in Spain, and they've got like agreements with the US where they send over some Spanish assistants and we send over English assistants, and I mean it's open like worldwide, but it was one of the ways that they actually had like this visa system set up already for you to do basically a year program. And I was lucky enough because one of my mom's friends had a daughter who did the program, so I was able to get in contact with her and talk to her. So I decided, why not? I signed up for the program. In doing research, I also found out that it was often helpful to have a TEFL certificate. So I was also looking into TEFL certificate programs, and I procrastinated, which I shouldn't, but let's be honest, I do. So I procrastinated and I sent in my application a little bit late. So the thing with the program in Spain is that it was first come, first serve, which means that they have X number of spots, and if you turn in your application pretty close to the deadline, they've probably already been filled. So I turned in my application before the deadline at some point, but I was kind of further down the line. So I actually was put on the wait list. And I was like, well, you know what? I have like been working on this for too long. I'm going to get over there one way or another. So what I decided was I was going to, because I wasn't sure if I would get off the wait list, I decided I would sign up for a TEFL program that was basically a month or so before the actual program started, and also before the school year started, so that one, I would have my TEFL certificate, which would be really useful. 2, minimum, I would be able to stay 1 month in Spain. 3, if I was moved off the wait list, I would already be in Spain and I could just move to wherever my position was. And if not, I could look for a job. Having the TEFL certificate, it would be easier for me to find a job, and I would already be there to actually go job hunting. So I signed up for a program in Seville and went there in July, and it turns out that I got off the wait list, and I actually was placed in the north. So I was placed in Galicia, and I knew like nothing about this, which it's actually funny because once I was there and I was thinking about it, I'd taken a semester of Spanish in college as well, and my teacher happened to be from A Coruña, and I like had no idea where that was, and so all of a sudden I had like moved to this region where she was actually from. Not the same province, but like the same region. So, you know, I did my TEFL certificate in Seville, and then I ended up moving to Vigo. So I stayed in Vigo for a year, and I loved it there. I was placed there completely by random. Because I was a wait list, I didn't get any of my like first choices, and it ended up being the best thing ever, because one, I really wanted to focus on Spanish, and it was a tiny like coastal city and they don't speak a lot of English there, so it was perfect because it forced me to work on my Spanish. It was a really, really good experience. I got really lucky because the school I was placed was in this tiny, tiny little town, and they actually, like, I don't know what happened. I wasn't supposed to have been placed there because the school hadn't actually asked for an assistant, but by the time, like, they realized that, the program was basically like, well, she's already there. Like, if you want her, like, she can stay and work with you guys for a year. And they're like, yeah, okay. So they were all like super friendly. It was awesome. So I decided that I wanted to stay for a second year, but my school hadn't actually asked for an assistant, which meant that the next year they probably weren't going to have one. So I figured, well, why don't I just change regions completely and try someplace else? So I went back down to Andalusia, and I ended up getting placed in a city called Marbella, which, funnily enough, all of my colleagues were like, ooh, that's like the really rich, like fancy area. It's not actually. That is like one town over. So I did my second year there. So my first year I was actually in an elementary school. My second year I worked with adults, and I had some really awesome colleagues. I really enjoyed working where I was working. The city itself was not my favorite, just too many tourists, too much English. You know, I really, really just dived into the whole like Spanish culture and just speaking Spanish all the time, which was amazing. So I did my 2 years, and after the 2 years, it was during kind of the financial crisis, and Spain was hit pretty hard. So I decided not to risk it, and actually it was a good thing I didn't, because one of my colleagues from the school I worked at my second year told me later on that they didn't even get an assistant, that like that would have been my third year, they didn't even get an assistant that year. So I think it was probably the right choice. So I ended up moving back to the United States because I, at that point, hadn't interpreted like at all in 2 years and hadn't interpreted a lot in about 3. Even after I graduated, I did interpret a little bit. I had like a volunteer position that I interpreted for, but I didn't have like a steady interpreting job even after I graduated. So it had basically been about 3 years since I graduated, and I hadn't really been interpreting. So I decided it was time to move back to the US and actually see if I wanted to be an interpreter, like full time. So I decided that, you know, moving back, I didn't have an apartment anymore in the US. I didn't have any like furniture or anything, and I wasn't sure like where I was going to go from there. So I decided to just go ahead and I moved back in with my parents. And luckily, we were right next to the school that I went to when I was a kid that had a deaf program, which meant that they had interpreters. So while I was still in Spain, or actually, I think when I was visiting for Christmas, I went in and I asked, and I like found out about the application process. And then when I was still in Spain and I was getting closer to when I was going to be moving back, I went ahead and I sent in my application. And I got an email from them asking if I could come in for an interview. I said, okay, well, yeah, I'm in Spain until like June 1st. Anytime after that. So I had an interview, I want to say it was like the first or the second week that I was back. So like hadn't been interpreting for years, and it's like, all right, let's go have this interview. So I went in, and it was definitely a sink or swim moment, but they must have been okay with what they saw because I ended up getting the job. And so I did some programs over the summer to like get back into it and just like, you know, get my skills back up because I was a little bit rusty because, you know, use it or lose it kind of thing. So I ended up staying at the school for 2 years, and I think about 6 months in, I realized that as much as I love sign language, I really missed being in Europe. I really missed having like all of those different languages around me. And that's, I mean, obviously that's not to say that there aren't a ton of languages spoken in the US. However, it's not as prevalent just because the main language that you're going to encounter like in any store is going to be English. And I realized that I really liked that, living in a different language, but having English be the language that I use at work. So about 6 months in, I started thinking about like, okay, well, if I don't want to stay here, like where do I want to go? So I ended up applying for this program called EPIC, which is I think English Program in Korea or some kind of acronym like so. And I think there's 2 programs in Korea, but this was one that I had friends who had done this particular program and they told me about it. So I ended up applying for it. And at the time it was really disappointing, but I think in the long run it was probably for the best. But I ended up getting rejected for that program. And so I was like, all right, back to plan B, like what am I going to do? So when I had lived in Spain, I actually had thought about doing the program in France. So there is an assistant program here in France. And the only thing was, and kind of the deciding point for me was the French program requires you to have a B1 level of French. So to give you, I don't know how like common this is for people who are outside of like the language teaching community and all that kind of stuff, but basically you have 6 levels. You have A1, A2 is your like your beginner level, B1, B2 is your intermediate level, and then C1, C2 is your advanced level. So essentially like you're functionally bilingual if you have like a C2 level. And it's C2 is like functionally bilingual, but also with like academic level language skills. So, you know, you needed to have like a lower intermediate level in order to do the French program. And I had never studied French. I had done like a quarter in middle school where I did introduction to foreign languages. And so we had a quarter per like Latin, Spanish, French, German. Yeah, those are the 4 languages. So we had a quarter per language. So I had done the basics, like counting 1 through 10, hi, my name is, like really basic stuff. And so I had never applied for the program because of that, because I didn't speak French. And, you know, I had spoken Spanish, which was one of the reasons why I went for the Spanish program. So, you know, I had considered back in Spain that, you know, I thought maybe it would be fun to move to a different country, whatever. And I ended up staying in Spain for that 2nd year. But later, I had missed that year's application deadlines, I think, at that point. And so I decided that I would go ahead and sign up for French classes and try and apply for the next year. So I ended up doing French classes at the Alliance Française in Washington, D.C. And I had a really, really awesome teacher. She was amazing. And I think my first like 3 classes, I think I did like 4 classes total through them. I think the first 3 classes were with her, and she was just fantastic. And so I did my French classes, I did the application, and so I ended up getting accepted for the 2014-2015 school year. So in September of 2014, I moved to France, and I had signed up to do this program, but in the back of my mind, I was like, I need to figure out a way to stay here long-term. I'd like to live long-term in Europe. So I need to figure out how to make that happen, because obviously I can't just be an English assistant for the rest of my life. It's fun and all, but you can't really go anywhere. You have that job, but there's no room for growth. Like, you can get better at doing it, but that's basically all it is. So I showed up the first year, and I started thinking, like, what was my next step going to be? I ended up getting an extension on my visa, and I stayed over the summer, and I signed up for French classes at school, because basically through Alliance Française, I took up to like an A2 level of French, and I obviously got better while I was living there, but I was like, you know, it'd be nice to have more, like a better base. I did like a year program, and then my job was, I just reapplied to be an assistant, so I worked my assistant job around doing those classes. And at some point I thought I was maybe going to move to Italy, but I decided that rather than moving around a bunch more, I liked my town. You know, I've been here now for 3 years, and I really, really like it here. I figured it was worth it to see if I could stick it out and just get my residency and figure out a way to stay here, and then, you know, moving around later would be a different issue, because obviously as much as I like French, I still want to learn other languages. So I decided that I'd been doing English teaching for a while, and it wasn't what I went to school for, but I really like English. I liked, you know, sharing my language and my culture with the kids that I was teaching. And so I decided that it might be kind of interesting, because at this point, so my 2nd year here, I had already done 4 years as an English assistant, because I'd done 2 in Spain and then 2 so far in France. So by that time, I was like, you know, I love being an assistant, but there's nowhere to go from here. So I thought that I like doing this job. Maybe I would be an okay English teacher, like a full-time English teacher. So there was a program at the university here, and the way that it works is, in France for a lot of things, you have to pass basically these really competitive national exams. And if you get it, you basically get a year as a student teacher. So I did the first year of this master's program, and it's basically preparation for this exam. So I sat for my exams, and it was really nerve-wracking, because a lot of the people that I worked with, you know, colleagues and friends and all that, they're like, you know, don't worry, like, a lot of people don't make it the first year. I know people who've taken it like 5 times. I mean, it is a competitive exam. And I took the exam for the private schools because, well, for one thing, the private schools function a little bit more like the school system in the US, where you kind of apply to specific schools and then they accept you or not. Whereas the public school system, especially your like first year after you do your exams, the first year when you're doing your student teacher year, they usually keep you where you live because you're still doing your master's. After that, however, you get moved around based on your seniority. So if you don't have a lot of seniority, you get placed like it could be hundreds of miles away from where you actually live and from where your family is. So that was one thing for me. I wanted to be able to choose where I worked more or less. Obviously, it depends on if they have positions open, but at least I could choose to stay in my region, whereas if I was in the public schools, I'd be forced to move probably. The other thing was that as an American, I am not allowed to sit for the public school exams. You have to have a European passport. So kind of all things pointed in direction of private schools. So as English teachers, we're really lucky. There's a ton more positions than there are for any other foreign language, and even for a lot of other subjects. Not all of them, but for a number of them, like we have a fair number of positions that come up every year. I think it's like 1,200 in public schools, and it was just under 200 in private schools for like all of France. So I sat for the exam and I actually got it, which was incredible. It was a very nerve-wracking experience, but once you have it, you've got it. You have to validate your master's. You have to pass your master's and make sure that your student teacher year has been approved and all that. But like once you've got it and you pass that, you have it. You don't have to retake it. So this is my second year, so this is my student teaching year. So I actually got placed at a school that was really close to my house, and they're awesome. And I'm doing my master's, so because I am now in the private school system, I had to change universities. So I have to commute twice a week. It was like an hour-and-a-half commute, which is kind of long, but I carpool with other people in my program who also live near my town. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. So that is kind of like how I got here. I've had, every once in a while, I have people ask like, what languages do I speak? So obviously English is my native language. I'm trained as an ASL interpreter, so American Sign Language. I speak Spanish, French, and I've been studying Italian on my own. I also studied Arabic. However, while I can still like read and write the alphabet, I no longer have a conversational level just because I didn't have enough time to continue it. I need more exposure to it, basically. So you guys can tell languages are definitely something that I really, really love. And I love the fact that, living here in Europe, I have French all around me. I have friends who speak Spanish. I've got a couple of Italian friends, and then I get to still speak English for work. So it's kind of ideal. So sorry that was so long-winded. Let's move on to the next question. I figured I would go ahead, since this is a bullet journaling channel, let you guys know how I got into bullet journaling. So I started bullet journaling in March of 2016. How did I find it? I think I was on Facebook, and I had like a suggested post that was probably the official bullet journal like video or something like that. And who knows how it actually came up. I mean, obviously I like paper and stationery and all that kind of stuff, but who knows how Facebook works. Anyway, so I saw this and I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. So I've always been a planner. I've always had like agendas. I keep my old agendas because that's, my life. And so I was like, I like planning. This sounds cool. So I watched the video and I just like fell down the rabbit hole. Obviously, if you come into the community, you find Ryder Carroll pretty quickly. I mean, obviously. A lot of people will start with Boho Berry and then find Ryder, for example. You've got Kim, Tiny Ray of Sunshine. You've got Jess of Pretty Prince and Paper. Back about a year ago when I first started, those were like the top 3 that kind of come up pretty quickly, or top 4 actually. So the top 3 and then the official website, obviously. So I, fell in, I was watching all the videos and checking out all the blog posts and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't know if I could give up my agenda because I'm very organized and I just like having that kind of structure. But I was like, this could be kind of a cool thing. I like doing this kind of manual hand crafting, like that kind of stuff. Why not? I'll give it a go. So I started my first bullet journal, and actually I had like an old moleskin that was lying around. It was a lined one. And I started signing up and I went nuts. I mean, it was doodles and just like every single possible thing that you could put on a daily. Like I had the weather, I had the time bar, I had doodles for my headers, like all of that kind of stuff. And so I started out doing that because obviously you kind of start with what you see and then you go from there. And after about a week, I was like, 1, too crazy. Like there's just too much going on for me visually. Like I can't handle this. And 2, I decided that I wanted to get a Leuchtturm because I was finding that I wasn't having a lot of space in the moleskin. Like it was just kind of narrow and I wasn't able to do the things that I wanted to do. And I also really was curious to try dot grid. So I got my first Leuchtturm. And so the first like official month in my Leuchtturm is April. So I started in April and went from there. And, pretty quickly I found hand lettering and all that. So I started like playing around with that. And basically I've just been doing it ever since. I think probably by summer, was April, yeah, probably by summer, I had completely abandoned my original agenda and I was just using the bullet journal. By my second bullet journal, I had moved into a collection bullet journal, so like I'd started splitting off into like separate things. So yeah, I don't follow like the true system, as you guys will have seen, because I have a lot of different side bullet journals that have other specific purposes that I just kind of set up in the same style as a bullet journal. But yeah, that was kind of how I got started. For the next question, I don't know if this is something you guys are interested in, so I'll try and keep it short, but I thought some of you might be curious. So why did I start my Instagram account and my YouTube channel? So a friend of mine said that he thought that if I posted pictures of my stuff, they would do well. Why don't I start an Instagram account? And I was like, I wasn't sure, but I'd already kind of thought of Sunshine and Stationery. And I was like, if I did do it, I already have a name. And so one day I went to visit him and it was raining outside. And so we just like sat down and we set up my Instagram account. So that was kind of how I started. So when I started, I basically started really quickly doing my weekly flip through. So if you follow me on Instagram, every Sunday, or most Sundays, because sometimes I miss it, but usually on Sunday, I do a quick flip through, quick for me, a quick flip through of my week. Just like, what the setup looked like all together so you could see the pages consecutively rather than just having the one page snapshot, and with explanations of, how it went and all that kind of stuff. So, Instagram only lets you do videos of a minute long. And I don't know if that's like since changed because I've never actually attempted it. I always just do videos that are less than a minute. And I had done videos on my account since the beginning, basically. And so I was getting to the point where I wanted to do more videos and have different explanations and that kind of stuff. But that 1 minute was just so short. And so when I set up my Instagram account, I set up a Gmail. So that meant that I had a YouTube that was linked to Sunshine and Stationery. And I decided that I don't remember if it was my first or like one of my first videos, I did a flip through of my first bullet journal, because that was one of those things that all of like the big accounts, they would do these flip throughs of their bullet journal. I thought that was really cool, but you can't do a flip through in a minute. Like, it's just not possible. So I decided to try and film and post it on my YouTube account and figure like at least people from my Instagram who are curious can go there and find it, like never expecting it to become like anything big or whatever. So honestly, like I had no idea what I was doing. If you go back and you look at my old videos, it is very, very clear that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So to give you an idea, I didn't have a tripod. I still don't have enough, like I still film with my phone, but I didn't have a tripod. So what I would do is I would clear off space on one side of my kitchen table, like move the chairs out of the way and everything. I washi taped my phone onto the table to look down, so I had like an overhead shot, and I would film sitting on my floor. Which is why for a really long time I did not do any sort of plan with me's where I had to actually write, because trying to like write on the floor while you're sitting on the floor is really difficult, at least for me. So I would only do kind of flip through style, explanatory, walkthrough, etc. videos. I think my first video, the first bullet journal flip through, I didn't even know to zoom in. It was a disaster. So obviously I've worked on this. I'm getting a little bit better. When I first started, I would do all of my videos in one take. I did not edit. I would just do all of my videos in one take. I actually had a friend of mine who would edit the videos sometimes for me. I think she edited a couple of them. And then eventually I was like, all right, come on, Caitlin, like get it together. You need to figure out how to edit your own videos. So I learned how to edit, and I finally got a tripod so I could actually do plan with me's like on my table. Next step is going to be getting better lighting, various things like that. But I had no idea what I was doing when I was starting out. I kind of just did it as like an extension of my Instagram where I could post longer videos. And, somehow here we are. Last question, because this is already going to be super, super long, is what are my top 5 supplies? So I picked 5 because I wanted to keep it short, but let's be honest, I have a lot of other ones, but I'll give you guys the stuff that I use like a ton. So first up and foremost, if you guys have seen any of my videos whatsoever, you guys know I am 100% team Leuchtturm. I know that there are some people who don't really like the Leuchtturms because you do get a fair amount of ghosting. I personally, it doesn't bother me, and I'm a creature of habit, so I have all of my old bullet journals lined up on my shelf, like with my archiving stickers. I always do it kind of the same way. And I like having the same journal, like they're all the same size, they're all the same width. It just, I don't know, I visually like that appeals to me. So I started with Leuchtturm, so at least for the time being, that's what I'm gonna stick with. I do use other journals for different things, like some of my, like not my personal bullet journal, but some of my other notebooks. Obviously I'll use other notebooks because there are amazing brands out there. Just my personal bullet journal, I've kind of made the choice to stick with Leuchtturm because it's cohesive, basically. So that's number one. Second is my everyday writer. So currently my favorite is an InkJoy gel pen, but I also really like the Pilot G1. They're both 0.5. I really like 0.5 for writing. I do have other ones that are like a little bit smaller for other things, but just everyday writing, I really enjoy these pens. And these ones I love because the InkJoy dries really fast, which for a lefty, it's key. Next up, for drawing spreads, I like, and I know this is a box for Staedtler pigment liners, but I actually use microns. So I have my microns in here. So I basically just like buy the pack of microns and I just put them in this box when I get home because then it like stands up on my desk. Yeah, I've tried different ones. I tried the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pens. I tried the Staedtler pigment liners, and I've tried the microns. And I have to say, I really like the microns just because to me, they're a little bit of like a truer black, and I like the variety of nib sizes because the Faber-Castell are great as well, but you've only really got like the 4 sizes. And I like that the Staedtler and the microns have the points. So these are 0.05, 0.01, 02, 03, 05, and 08. And the Staedtler and the microns are basically the same nib sizes, but I think that the Staedtler are just like a slightly more like gray black, whereas this is a truer black, and that's really the only reason why I choose these. They cost fairly similarly. There's like maybe $2 or $3 difference between them, but I don't know. So I like these guys. Then I love brush pens, and please forgive me because I'm not going to be entirely, I'm kind of cheating, but my 3 favorites. So I love the Pentel sign pens. If you guys have seen any of my videos, you know I use these a ton. They are my favorite small brush pen, and I do buy the soft nib because I like the flexibility. Is just easier for me to actually brush letter with. I have one of the hard nib ones, and to me it's like a marker. Like it just doesn't really work the same way for how I write. So I love these ones. I think I've gone through between the gray and the black. I've probably had like 3 or 4 of each of them because they are my main go-to lettering pen, especially in my bullet journal because they're smaller. A recent favorite brush pen is the Tombow Fudnoske, again with the soft nib. It's easier for me to do. And it's a slightly bigger nib, but it writes very similarly to the Pentel sign pen, so absolutely love those. And for bigger brush lettering are Tombows. So I actually, for Christmas last year, I got the entire set of Tombows, and I love them, like just all the colors. Obviously I use the grays a ton, but I do have other colors that I use as well. So what are we up to? 4? 1, 2, 3. Yep, so number 4, brush pens, for sure. Sorry for making that like one group, but I have a couple of favorites. And then the last one, my new favorite, probably in the last 3 or 4 months, my new favorite is the Copper Faber-Castell. It is a 1.5, so it's like the broad point, I think is what they call it. So it's just kind of like a marker tip, but it is a gorgeous copper, and I actually already have a backup one of this one because I can tell that my ink is going, like it's getting to points where it looks a little bit more orange, like I'm losing some of the metallic on it. So I'm gonna use this guy up, and then once he's gone, I have a backup for him. But that is my 5th and like newest favorite, if you will. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. So I will see you guys in my next video. If you like this, please consider giving it a thumbs up and or subscribing to my channel. And again, if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, or if you want to see more videos like this, or if you would rather I just do like regular journaling videos, like that's fine too. Just let me know what you guys thought of having this little vloggy style video, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.